An Oregon town still in shock how people in Roseburg are trying to come to grips with a deadly shooting on a college campus. Plus an aerial bombing at a hospital in the embattled Afghan city of Kunduz. Now aid workers say more than 24 people are unaccounted for. And later, Russia faces increasing pressure to stop airstrikes in Syria, but Moscow doesn't seem willing to back down. Hello and welcome to our viewers in the US and around the world. I'm Lynda Kinkade and this is CNN Newsroom. We're going to begin in Roseburg, Oregon, where the tight-knit community there is grieving and trying to come to terms with Thursday's deadly college massacre. Right now, authorities are not providing a motive for the killings. What we do know is that the gunman was a student at Umpqua Community College, enrolled in the class where he opened fire. He briefly served in the Army in 2008, but a military official says he never made it out of basic training. The 9 victims who were killed were students and a teacher at UCC. John Vause is covering all of this for us from the college campus in Roseburg. And John, we're starting to learn more about the 9 victims. What can you tell us?
Well, Lynda, since all of this began, officials here have stressed they want to keep the focus on the victims. And so the sheriff here in Douglas County, the man who has made a point of not mentioning the name of the gunman, well, on Friday, he read out the names of the 9 victims who were gunned down at this community college.
The victims are Lucero Alcarez of Roseburg, 19 years old. Quinn Glenn Cooper of Roseburg, 18 years old. Kim Saltmarsh Dietz of Roseburg, 59 years old. Lucas Eibel of Roseburg, 18 years old. Jason Dale Johnson of Winston, 33 years old. Lawrence Levine of Glide, 67 years old. Mr. Levine was the teacher. Serena Dawn Moore of Myrtle Creek, 44 years old. Trevin Taylor Onpak of Sutherland, 20 years old. And Rebecca Ann Carnes of Myrtle Creek, 18 years old.
And the bodies of the dead have now been flown back here to Roseburg. They arrived on 2 Black Hawk helicopters. That is after they were released by the medical examiner in Portland. And we should note the body of the gunman was not among them. But with the 9 victims back home, if you like, that now means the start of another painful chapter here. Lynda, the families and friends will start planning those funerals and memorial services.
Such a tough time for those families. Looking at the gunman, we know he was a young man who had quite a collection of handguns and rifles and a serious interest in high-profile shootings. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, we've been told a lot more details in the last 24 hours by officials, mostly that he had a lot more firepower than originally thought. In fact, officials with the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms now say that he was linked to 13 weapons in all. They recovered 6 weapons from the scene. That includes 1 rifle as well as 5 handguns. And at his apartment, there were another 7 weapons. That was a shotgun, 2 handguns, and then 4 rifles there. Also, they found body armor at the site of the shooting, as well as 5 magazines of ammunition, and they also recovered a large amount of ammunition from his apartment as well. We're also learning a little bit more about his state of mind, and sources have told us that he handed pages of writing to one of the survivors to give to police. And in that writing, he details a hatred towards black men, a frustration that he couldn't form proper relationships. He also studied other mass shootings and complained that the shooters in those other cases did not try to kill police, and he vowed he would do just that. And CNN has learned that he also sought out treatment for mental health issues. Lynda?
Okay, thank you so much for that update. John Vause on the scene there in Oregon. Thank you. President Barack Obama has pleaded repeatedly for tougher gun laws, but there's little he can do on his own, and here's why. The Second Amendment to the US Constitution protects Americans' right to keep and bear arms, a provision gun advocates strongly defend. Besides federal gun laws, there are also many state and local gun laws which vary quite widely, and any change would likely need approval from US lawmakers. But many of them are reluctant to take on the powerful gun lobby led by the National Rifle Association. Now, in the hours after the shooting, an angry and frustrated President Barack Obama challenged the news media, to look at the number of Americans killed by gun violence compared to those who died in acts of terrorism. CNN Chief US Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto crunched the numbers, and they are staggering.
There's been another mass shooting in America.
Showing deep frustration in the wake of one more mass shooting, President Obama issued a challenge to the media.
Have news organizations tally up the number of Americans who've been killed through terrorist attacks over the last decade and the number of Americans who've been killed by gun violence, and post those side by side on your news reports.
We did, and here are the answers. First, CNN went back more than a decade to 2001, so as not to exclude 9/11, by far the largest terror attack on U.S. soil. From 2001 to 2013, more than 406,000 Americans were killed by guns on U.S. soil, more than 100 times the number of U.S. citizens killed at home or abroad from acts of terrorism during the same time period, just over 3,000. Nearly 60% of gun deaths, about 237,000, were suicides. Exclude suicides and gun-related deaths fall to 169,000, but still drastically higher than the more than 3,000 killed by terrorists, 50 times higher. The enormous numbers lead some to call gun violence a national security threat on a par with or greater than terrorism, and deserving of a similar attention.
The horrific tragedy in Oregon, the number of dead, that's an average weekend in Chicago.
In some U.S. cities, as noted by CNN analyst Peter Bergen, the death rates from gun violence exceed death rates in actual war zones. The murder rate in New Orleans, 6 times the rate of civilian deaths in Afghanistan. And the nation's capital, Washington, twice as deadly as the Afghan war is for civilians. Law enforcement officials trace many gun deaths to drug and gang warfare.
The reality is, on a daily basis, the drug problem is probably, I would say, one of the greatest national security threats that we have, because the majority of people that are dying from guns are related to drug violence.
And as we've mentioned, 13 legally bought guns have been traced back to the gunman, 6 found at the shooting scene and 7 at his home. In the next half hour, we'll get some analysis on the gun control debate, now back in the spotlight.